The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of copper and gold by the merciless Arizona sun. Jack Morrison had been tracking the raiders for 3 days, following a trail of destruction that led deeper into Apache territory than any white man should venture alone. But when he crested the rocky ridge overlooking White Eagle Canyon, what he found wasn't raiders. It was something far worse. The Apache village lay in ruins below him, smoke still rising from the burned-out wickiups like ghostly fingers reaching toward an indifferent sky. Bodies scattered across the sandy ground told a story of massacre, not battle. Women, children, elders, all cut down without mercy by what looked like cavalry sabers and army rifles. Jack's weathered hands tightened on his horse's reins as rage and disgust warred in his chest. He'd spent 10 years fighting Apaches during the Indian Wars, but this wasn't war, this was butchery. And something about the scene felt wrong, staged almost like someone wanted it to look like an official army operation while covering up something else entirely. That's when he saw her. At first, Jack thought it was just another body among the others, a young Apache woman lying motionless beside the ruins of what had once been a medicine lodge. But as his horse picked its way carefully down the canyon wall, he caught the slightest movement, the barely perceptible rise and fall of breathing. Jack dismounted quickly, his boots crunching on scattered pottery and burned timber. The girl, she couldn't be more than 20, lay on her side, dark hair matted with blood, traditional Apache dress torn and stained. A deep gash across her throat had healed roughly, leaving a jagged scar that explained why she made no sound when Jack knelt beside her. Her eyes opened as a shadow fell across her face, dark eyes filled with such pain and weariness that Jack felt his heart clench. She tried to scramble away, terror overriding weakness, but her body betrayed her. She'd been here for days, maybe longer, without food or water. "Easy there," Jack said softly, the way he might gentle a wounded animal. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl's eyes darted to the cavalry insignia on his old army jacket, and Jack saw her prepare to die. She'd survived whatever happened here, only to face another soldier. Her chin lifted with fierce pride despite her condition, and Jack found himself admiring her courage even as his heart broke for her suffering. "I'm not army anymore," he said, slowly removing the jacket and tossing it aside. "Haven't been for years. My name's Jack Morrison. I live about 40 miles south of here, and I want to help you whether you like it or not." The girl watched him with the intensity of a cornered wildcat as Jack moved to his saddlebags. He pulled out his water canteen and a piece of jerky, approaching her with the same patience he'd use with a wild Mustang. "You need water," he said, uncapping the canteen. "You need food. And you need someone to tend those wounds properly." She flinched when he reached toward her, but desperation finally overcame fear. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, her dark skin pallid with exhaustion. When Jack helped her sit up enough to drink, she drained half the canteen in desperate gulps. As she drank, Jack studied the devastation around them. The attack had been thorough and brutal, but certain details nagged at him. The bodies had been stripped of anything valuable. Silver jewelry, beadwork, even the decorated war ponies were gone. This wasn't military policy. This was robbery disguised as warfare. "What happened here?" Jack asked gently, though he didn't expect an answer. The girl's hand went instinctively to her throat, and Jack saw the pain that flickered across her features. Someone had taken her voice along with her family, her entire world. But her eyes burned with intelligence and a desperate need to communicate something important. She struggled to her feet, swaying dangerously, and Jack caught her arm to steady her. She didn't pull away this time, and he took that as progress. With trembling fingers, she pointed toward the far end of the canyon, then made a gesture Jack didn't understand. Something about men on horses, many men. "You saw who did this," Jack said, and the girl nodded emphatically. "White men." Another nod, more urgent this time. "Soldiers." She hesitated, then shook her head and pointed to Jack's discarded cavalry jacket. "Not soldiers, but men dressed as soldiers." Jack's jaw tightened as the pieces began falling into place. Someone had wanted this massacre to look like an official army action, probably to cover their tracks after robbing the village. The girl was trying to tell him something else, her hands moving in what he gradually realized was a form of sign language. Jack had picked up some Apache hand signals during his army days, but this was more complex, more nuanced. She was telling him about a cache, something hidden, something the raiders had been looking for but hadn't found. Sacred objects, Jack guessed, and she nodded. Hidden somewhere safe? The girl looked around the ruined village with such profound sadness that Jack had to look away. Everything she'd ever known was gone, her family, her home, her people, even her voice. But she was alive, and he wasn't about to let her die alone in this canyon of death. "Listen to me," Jack said firmly, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I can't bring back what you've lost. Nobody can. But I can get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can heal. My ranch isn't much, but it's got good water, solid shelter, and nobody bothers me there." The girl stared at him for a long moment, and Jack could practically hear her weighing her options. Trust the white man who found her, or die alone among the bones of her people. Finally, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Getting her onto his horse was a challenge. She was weak from her ordeal, and clearly in pain from wounds Jack hadn't even properly examined yet. But she endured it with stoic determination, clinging to the saddle horn as Jack led his horse carefully out of the canyon. As they climbed toward the ridge, the girl looked back once at the ruins of her village. Jack saw her lips move silently, and though he couldn't hear the words, he understood she was saying goodbye. The ride to Jack's ranch took the better part of 2 days, with frequent stops to rest and water. The girl, he still didn't know her name and had no way to ask, proved to be tougher than she looked. She never complained, never showed weakness beyond what her body forced upon her. But Jack caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, studying him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that survival meant reading people quickly and accurately. His ranch, when they finally reached it, wasn't much to look at: a simple adobe house, a small barn, corrals for his horses, and a well that never ran dry. But it was honest work and honest living, which was more than Jack could say for a lot of places in the territory. The girl stared at the modest spread with something like wonder, as if she'd forgotten that such peaceful places could exist. Jack helped her down from the horse and guided her toward the house, noting how she instinctively cataloged every entrance, every hiding place, every potential escape route. Old habits from a life spent on the edge of survival. Inside, Jack's bachelor quarters were clean but Spartan: a kitchen table, a couple of chairs, a bed in one corner, and little else. The girl looked around uncertainly until Jack gestured toward the bed. "You'll sleep there," he said. "I'll take the floor until we can figure out something better." She shook her head emphatically, pointing to herself and then to the floor. Jack understood. She wouldn't take his bed, wouldn't be indebted to him any more than necessary. He admired her pride even as it frustrated him. "Stubborn," he muttered, but there was fondness in his voice. "All right, we'll compromise. You take the bed tonight, and tomorrow we'll work something else out." As evening fell, Jack prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread while the girl sat at his table, watching his every move. When he set a plate in front of her, she hesitated before eating, as if unsure whether accepting his food would bind her to him somehow. "It's just food," Jack said gently. No strings attached. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd known real hunger. Jack found himself studying her face in the lamplight. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that missed nothing. Beautiful, but it was her strength that drew him, the way she refused to be broken even after losing everything. When the meal was finished, Jack showed her where she could wash up and gave her one of his old shirts to sleep in. The girl disappeared behind the blanket he'd hung for privacy, and Jack tried not to think about the trust she was showing by making herself vulnerable in his home. Later, lying on his bedroll by the cold fireplace, Jack listened to the soft sounds of the girl, trying not to cry. He wanted to comfort her somehow, but what words could possibly ease the kind of pain she carried? So he lay quietly in the darkness, letting her grieve in private while he stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell he was going to do now. He brought her here to save her life, but he was beginning to realize that keeping her alive might be the easy part. Out there somewhere, the men who destroyed her village were still free, still dangerous. And if they discovered that someone had survived their massacre? Jack's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver beside his bedroll. Tomorrow he'd start asking questions, start piecing together who was behind the attack on White Eagle Canyon. Tonight he'd stand guard over a broken Apache girl who'd somehow found the strength to trust him with her life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional Western stories. Hit that notification bell to see how Jack and the Apache girl's bond deepens in our next chapter. Chapter 2. Dawn broke slowly over the Morrison Ranch, painting the desert in soft pastels that seemed almost apologetic after the harsh brilliance of the previous day. Jack woke to the sound of his horses whinnying nervously in the corral, and his hand was on his gun before his eyes were fully open. 10 years of frontier living had taught him that spooked horses meant trouble. He rolled quietly from his bedroll and peered through the window. The Apache girl was gone. Jack's heart hammered as he checked the bed where she'd slept. The blankets were neatly folded, his shirt laid carefully at the foot of the bed. No signs of struggle, no indication she'd been taken. She'd simply vanished like morning mist, as silently as she'd endured everything else. But when Jack stepped outside, he found her by the well, fully dressed in her torn Apache clothing, filling his water bucket with methodical precision. She looked up as he approached, and he saw something different in her dark eyes, not the wariness of yesterday, but a kind of resigned determination. "Thought you'd run off," Jack said, relief evident in his voice. The girl shook her head and pointed to herself, then to the ranch around them, then made a sweeping gesture that Jack interpreted as work. She was offering to earn her keep, to contribute rather than simply accept his charity. Pride, he was learning, was as much a part of her as breathing. Over the next few hours, Jack discovered that the Apache girl was far more capable than her injuries suggested. She moved through his small ranch like she was cataloging every detail, every weakness, every strength. When she found his vegetable garden struggling in the harsh desert soil, she spent 20 minutes examining the plants and the irrigation system with the intensity of a military scout studying enemy positions. Then, without asking permission, she began to work. Jack watched in fascination as she redirected his crude irrigation channels with an understanding of water flow that spoke to generations of desert survival. She knew which plants needed more shade, which required different soil composition, which were fighting diseases that Jack hadn't even noticed. Her hands moved with confident efficiency, and for the first time since he'd found her, she seemed truly alive. "Your people taught you well," Jack said quietly. The girl paused in her work, and sadness flickered across her features like a shadow. She touched her throat, then made a complex series of hand gestures that Jack was beginning to understand. She was telling him about her grandmother, an old woman who'd been the village's medicine keeper and plant expert. About lessons learned in childhood, knowledge passed down through generations. About wisdom that would die with her because there was no one left to teach. Jack felt a familiar anger burning in his chest, not at her, but at the senseless waste of it all. How many Apache grandmothers had died in that canyon? How much knowledge, how much culture had been erased in a single morning of violence? "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "I'm sorry for what they did to your people." The girl looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether his sympathy was genuine. Finally, she nodded once and returned to her work. That afternoon, as Jack mended harness in the shade of his barn, he became aware that he was being watched. Not by the girl. She was visible near the house, carefully tending his struggling chickens with the same methodical attention she'd given everything else. No, this felt different. Hostile. Jack's hand moved casually toward his rifle as he continued working, using his peripheral vision to scan the scrubland around his ranch. There, a glint of metal from behind a cluster of barrel cacti, about 300 yards north. Someone with a spyglass, watching his property. He finished with the harness at his normal pace, giving no sign he'd spotted the surveillance. But when he stood to walk back to the house, he deliberately positioned himself between the watcher and the Apache girl. If someone was here to finish what they'd started at White Eagle Canyon, they'd have to go through him first. The girl noticed his tension immediately. She straightened from feeding the chickens, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced efficiency of someone raised in hostile territory. When she spotted the same glint Jack had seen, her face went pale. She moved quickly to his side, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also with recognition. She knew who was watching them. "The same men," Jack asked quietly, and she nodded emphatically. "How many?" She held up 3 fingers, then made a gesture toward the east. 3 men, probably scouts for a larger group. Jack's mind raced through possibilities. His ranch was isolated, far from any help. If these were the same men who'd massacred the Apache village, they wouldn't hesitate to kill a white rancher and his Apache guest. The girl was trying to tell him something else, her hands moving urgently in that complex sign language. Jack caught fragments, danger, soon, many men coming. She was urging him to run, to leave her and save himself. "Like hell," Jack muttered. He guided her quickly into the house, then moved to his gun cabinet. The girl watched with growing alarm as he pulled out his Winchester rifle, checked the action, and began loading cartridges into his gun belt. "Listen to me," Jack said, turning to face her. I don't know who those men are or what they want, but I'm guessing it has something to do with what happened to your village. You survived something you weren't supposed to survive, and now they're here to fix that mistake." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but her jaw was set with determination. She pointed to herself, then to the door, making it clear she was willing to sacrifice herself to protect him. "No," Jack said firmly. "We're in this together now. You trusted me enough to come here, and I'm not about to let you down." He moved to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper, quickly sketching a map of his property. "There's a cave about half a mile south of here, hidden in those red rocks. If things go bad, you run there and wait. There's water, some supplies I cached years ago. You understand?" She nodded, but Jack could see she had no intention of running while he faced danger alone. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, and was surprised to see what might have been the ghost of a smile cross her lips. The attack came at sunset, just as Jack had expected. 3 riders approached openly from the north, but Jack's trained eye caught movement in the rocks to the east and west. Classic military flanking maneuver. These weren't random raiders. They were organized and experienced. The lead rider was a big man with a cavalry mustache and the kind of swagger that came from never being told no. He rode right up to Jack's porch as if he owned a place, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Evening, mister. Name's Colonel Bradshaw. We're tracking a dangerous Apache who escaped from a raid last week. We have reason to believe she might have come this way." "Don't know anything about any Apache," Jack lied smoothly. "Haven't seen anyone for weeks." Bradshaw's smile was cold and predatory. "That's funny because my scouts say they saw smoke from your chimney and 2 figures moving around your property. You sure you haven't been harboring a fugitive?" "I'm sure I don't like the tone of your questions," Jack replied, his hand moving closer to his rifle. "And I'm sure you're not any kind of colonel. Real cavalry officers don't go around massacring peaceful villages." The pretense dropped from Bradshaw's face like a discarded mask. "Smart man. Too smart for his own good. Boys." The flanking riders emerged from their hiding spots, guns drawn. But Jack had been expecting this. He dove sideways off his porch, rolling behind a water trough as bullets whined through the air where he'd been standing. The Apache girl appeared at his house's front window, and Jack's heart nearly stopped when he saw the rifle in her hands. She couldn't speak, but she could definitely shoot. Her first shot took down the rider to the east with professional precision. "The cave," Jack shouted, but she was already moving, providing covering fire as he fought his way toward better position. The battle was brief but vicious. These men were killers, but they'd made the mistake of underestimating both Jack's military experience and the Apache girl's warrior heritage. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the attackers were dead and Bradshaw was bleeding from a shoulder wound, trying to reload his pistol with shaking hands. Jack kicked the gun away and hauled the man to his feet. "Who sent you? Who's paying you to dress up like soldiers and murder Apache villages?" Bradshaw spat blood. "Go to hell." The Apache girl appeared at Jack's side, moving with deadly quiet. When Bradshaw saw her, his face went white with terror. She made a series of hand gestures, and Jack didn't need translation to understand their meaning. She wanted this man to suffer for what he'd done to her people. "She says you killed her grandmother," Jack said conversationally. "Her little sister, too. Says you made them watch each other die." Bradshaw's nerve broke. "It wasn't personal. We were hired to clear out the canyon, make it look like army work. The silver mine, they needed the Apache gone before anyone found out about the ore deposits." "What silver mine? Who hired you?" "Consortium out of Tucson. Rich men who wanted Apache land without the paperwork." Bradshaw was babbling now, desperate to stay alive. "They said the village was sitting on the biggest silver strike in the territory." Jack felt the pieces clicking into place. The Apache village hadn't been attacked for revenge or sport. It had been wiped out for money. Rich men in suits had hired killers to dress like soldiers and commit genocide for mining rights. The girl was listening intently, and Jack saw the moment she understood. Her people hadn't died in war or even in hatred. They died for the silver beneath their sacred ground. "Names," Jack demanded. "I want names." Bradshaw gave them up readily. A mining consortium led by a man named Harrison Blackwood, with ties to territorial politicians and business interests across Arizona. Men with enough money and influence to cover up a massacre if it served their purposes. When Jack had wrung every detail from the terrified killer, He looked at the Apache girl. She was staring at Bradshaw with eyes like black ice, and Jack knew she was thinking about justice. About revenge. Your choice, Jack said quietly. He murdered your family. Your people. The law probably won't touch him, not with the kind of money backing this operation. For a long moment, the girl held Bradshaw's fate in her hands. Then, slowly, she shook her head. She made gestures that Jack interpreted as letting the spirits judge him, letting his guilt destroy him from within. You heard her, Jack said, shoving Bradshaw toward his horse. Get out. Tell your bosses that the Apache girl they tried to kill is under my protection now. Tell them that if they want her, they'll have to go through me. And tell them that I know who they are and what they did. Bradshaw rode off into the desert night, clutching his wounded shoulder. Jack watched until he disappeared, then turned to find the Apache girl sitting on his porch steps, staring at the bodies of the men who tried to kill them both. It's over, Jack said, sitting beside her. For tonight, anyway. She looked at him and made a gesture he was beginning to recognize, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complex. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of something like hope. Tomorrow we'll start planning, Jack continued. Those men in Tucson need to pay for what they did. And your people deserve justice, even if it has to come from us. The girl nodded, and for the first time since he'd found her in that ruined canyon, Jack saw steel in her spine. She'd lost her voice, her family, her entire world. But she hadn't lost her spirit. Subscribe now to see how Jack and the Apache girl bring justice to the men who destroyed her village. The final chapter reveals whether love can grow from tragedy in the heart of the Old West. 3 weeks had passed since the attack on Jack's ranch, and in that time, the Apache girl had transformed from a broken survivor into something far more dangerous, a woman with a purpose. She'd established a daily routine that spoke to both her warrior heritage and her growing comfort with ranch life. Dawn found her practicing with Jack's rifles until she could hit targets he could barely see. Midday was for working the land, coaxing life from the desert with skills passed down through generations. But evenings were for planning. Jack had given her paper and charcoal, and she'd drawn detailed maps of the Tucson area from memory, marking every building, every road, every potential escape route. She might not be able to speak, but her intelligence was formidable, and her knowledge of the territory was encyclopedic. You've been thinking about this for a while, Jack observed one evening as she added details to her drawings. She nodded and pointed to a particular building on her map, a large structure on the outskirts of Tucson that she'd marked with special symbols. Then she made gestures indicating mining equipment, lots of men, and something hidden underground. The silver mine, Jack realized. You know where it is. The girl's expression grew grim. She drew a path from the mine to what looked like her old village, then made cutting motions across her throat. The message was clear. The mine was so close to White Eagle Canyon that her people would have discovered it eventually. That's why they had to die. Jack studied her drawings with growing admiration. This wasn't just revenge she was planning. It was justice, carefully calculated and precisely targeted. She understood that simply killing Harrison Blackwood and his associates wouldn't be enough. They needed to expose the entire conspiracy, destroy the mining operation, and ensure that her people's sacrifice wasn't forgotten. We'll need help, Jack said. There are too many of them, and they have too much influence. But I know someone who might be willing to listen. The next morning, they rode into the town of Desert Springs, 20 miles east of Jack's ranch. It was the closest settlement with a telegraph office, and Jack needed to send a message to someone he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, his former commanding officer, Colonel James McKenzie, now working for the War Department in Washington. The Apache girl attracted stares and whispered comments as they rode through town. Apache-white relationships were complicated in this part of Arizona, where recent wars had left scars on both sides. But she rode with her head high, ignoring the hostile looks with regal dignity that reminded Jack she came from a proud people. At the telegraph office, Jack composed his message carefully. Jim found evidence of massacre disguised as army operation. Mining consortium involved. Need federal intervention. Trust no local authorities. Check. While they waited for a response, Jack took the girl to the town's general store. She needed proper clothes if they were going to travel to Tucson, and her torn Apache dress marked her as a target. But when the store owner saw her, his face hardened with prejudice. We don't serve Indians here, he said flatly. Jack's hand moved to his gun, but the Apache girl caught his arm. She stepped forward and placed a silver hair ornament on the counter, beautiful Apache craftsmanship that had somehow survived the massacre. The store owner's eyes widened at its obvious value. "Payment in advance," Jack said quietly. "For whatever the lady needs." Greed overcame prejudice, and within an hour, the girl was dressed in practical traveling clothes that transformed her appearance completely. She looked like any other woman of the frontier now, though her dark eyes still held the fierce intelligence that marked her as someone not to be underestimated. The telegraph response came that afternoon. "Jack, federal marshals en route to your location. Maintain position and protect witness. Evidence of wider conspiracy involving territorial officials. Trust no one locally. Mackenzie." Federal marshals, Jack explained to the girl as they rode back to his ranch. "Men who answer to Washington, not local politicians. If anyone can bring justice for your people, it's them." The girl nodded, but Jack could see the skepticism in her eyes. She'd learned the hard way that promises of justice from white authorities often meant nothing. Still, she was willing to try, not because she trusted the system, but because she trusted him. 2 days later, 3 riders approached the Morrison ranch flying a federal flag. Jack had been expecting them, but the Apache girl vanished like smoke the moment they appeared on the horizon. Old habits died hard. When soldiers came, Apache people hid. The lead marshal was a weathered man named Thomas Stone, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years investigating complex crimes. He listened without interruption as Jack explained everything: the massacre at White Eagle Canyon, the fake soldiers, the mining conspiracy, and the Apache girl who'd survived to tell the tale. "Where is she now?" Stone asked when Jack finished. "Somewhere safe. She'll only show herself when she's ready." Stone nodded. "Can't say I blame her. We've seen evidence of similar operations across the territory, mining interests using hired killers to clear Indian lands, then bribing officials to cover it up. If your witness can identify the men involved." "She can do more than that," Jack said. "She can lead you to the mine itself." It took another day of patient waiting before the Apache girl finally revealed herself to the federal marshals. She approached their camp like a wild animal testing the wind, ready to flee at the first sign of threat. But when Marshal Stone spoke to her in broken Apache, a language he'd learned during his own army days, something in her posture relaxed slightly. "Shining deer," she managed to say, her damaged voice barely audible. It was the first word Jack had heard her speak. It took him a moment to realize she was telling them her name. Stone's face showed deep respect. "Shining deer, I'm honored to meet you. Your people were known for their courage, and you've proven worthy of that reputation." Tears gathered in her dark eyes, but she stood straighter. For the first time since the massacre, someone in authority was treating her people's memory with honor instead of dismissal. Over the next several hours, Shining Deer shared everything she knew. Using her drawings and sign language, with Jack translating, she laid out the entire conspiracy in devastating detail. The marshals took notes, asked careful questions, and treated her testimony with the seriousness it deserved. "We'll need you to guide us to the mine," Stone said finally. "And eventually, you may need to testify in federal court. Are you willing to do that?" Shining Deer looked at Jack, and he saw the question in her eyes. Could she trust these white lawmen to deliver justice? Could she risk everything on the promise that this time will be different? "I'll be with you," Jack said quietly. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." She nodded once, and Jack felt something shift between them, a deepening of the bond they'd forged through shared danger and mutual respect. The raid on the silver mine was planned with military precision. Federal marshals, backed by a company of legitimate army troops, would hit the operation at dawn when the workers were just starting their shifts. Shining Deer would guide them through the desert approaches she knew better than any white man could map. But as they prepared to leave Jack's ranch, Shining Deer pulled him aside. In the growing darkness, she made urgent gestures toward the mine, then toward herself, then toward him. Jack understood. She was trying to tell him this was dangerous, that he didn't have to come, that she released him from any obligation. "You think I'd let you face this alone?" Jack asked, and saw surprise flicker across her features. "Shining Deer, these past weeks, you've brought something to my life I didn't know I was missing. Purpose, maybe, or just the knowledge that there's still good worth fighting for in this world." She stared at him in the moonlight, and Jack saw the moment she understood what he was really saying. He cared about her, not as a responsibility or a duty, but as a woman. A remarkable woman who'd shown strength he'd never imagined possible. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and touched his face with fingers that trembled slightly. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss that tasted of sorrow and hope, of endings and new beginnings. The raid on the silver mine was swift and decisive. Shining deer led them through canyon paths invisible to untrained eyes, bringing them within striking distance before dawn. When the federal marshals moved in, they found everything she'd promised: illegal mining operations, stolen Apache artifacts being sold to collectors back east, and account books that detailed payments to the fake soldiers who'd massacred White Eagle Canyon. Harrison Blackwood was arrested in his Tucson mansion, along with 6 territorial officials who'd helped cover up the operation. The evidence was overwhelming, the federal case airtight. Justice, it seemed, would finally be served. But the real victory came 3 months later, when Shining Deer stood in federal court and spoke the names of her murdered family members aloud. Her voice was still rough from her injuries, but every word rang with the authority of a witness who would not be silenced. The defendants were sentenced to life in federal prison. The mining consortium was disbanded, their assets seized to pay reparations to surviving Apache families. Most importantly, the land where White Eagle Canyon stood was set aside as a memorial, protected forever from development. After the trial, Jack and Shining Deer returned to his ranch, but it wasn't the same place they'd left. Word their story had spread, and other Apache survivors, scattered by years of war and displacement, began to arrive. Not many, but enough to start building something new. "What do you want to do now?" Jack asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the desert in familiar copper and gold. Shining Deer was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting in his. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been in the courtroom. "Build," she said simply. "Build something good from what was lost. Teach the children who come here about the old ways, but also about the new. Show them that Apache and White can work together when there's respect and trust." Jack squeezed her hand. "Sounds like a worthy life's work. Will you help me?" she asked, and Jack heard the vulnerability beneath her strength. She was asking him to commit to more than just her. She was asking him to help rebuild an entire culture. "Every day for the rest of my life," Jack promised. As the stars emerged in the desert sky, Jack Morrison and Shining Deer began planning their future together, a future built on justice, mutual respect, and love that had grown from the ashes of tragedy. The Apache girl had found her voice again, and the lonely rancher had found his purpose. Their love story would become legend in the territory, proof that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds, and that hope could grow in the most unlikely places. Thank you for following this incredible journey of love, loss, and redemption. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful Western stories that will touch your heart and remind you of the strength of a human spirit. Hit that notification